Alors, bonjour tout le monde, mon nom est Patrick Clown, bienvenue au South Shore Report, émission d'affaires publiques en langue anglaise, et oui, en langue anglaise, à la radio allumée du 103.3 Longueuil. Cette semaine, nous avons Adrien Pouliot, qui est le chef du Parti conservateur du Québec, avec qui on va pouvoir parler avec lui des élections qui s'en viennent, de la charte, du non-budget de Québec, du budget fédéral. En fait, on a quand même plusieurs choses qu'on va pouvoir discuter, et on pourra reprendre la programmation régulière francophone du 103.3 la radio allumée à 13h. So, let me open this up. Monsieur Pouliot, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Thank you very much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I think, with the election coming up, and obviously we hear of the big parties, the two big ones, and sometimes Option Nationale, and obviously Solidaire. However, you're kind of under the radar, and I thought it'd be a good moment to get your take on what has been happening in Quebec City. And with the elections coming on the road, are you going to have candidates? How are you going to run? Where are you going to run? Are we going to have candidates here on the South Shore, and a whole bunch of stuff? So, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much.
So tell me, first things first, the charter. Where are you positioned? Obviously, the others we kind of know, and Madame Houda-Pémin from Lapinière, from Rossard, has brought in her own bill. Where do you stand? Where does your party stand on this?
Okay, well, first, our party is, our first fundamental political value is the protection of individual rights and freedoms. So that, as we start, it gives you an idea of where we stand. The charter, covers a lot of ground, a lot of issues. Most of the time when people ask, are you pro or against the charter, people think of, wearing of religious signs. And our view in that particular topic is that there's no reason to pass a law. The government, as an employer, could do like all other big employers, Bell Canada and Hydro-Quebec, basically have an administrative guide or a dress code saying here's how you can, here's the kind of stuff you can wear, and here are the signs you can wear, and you would have in that code you would have to balance the individual rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Canadian and Quebec Charter of Freedom and Rights, basically the freedom of religious expression, versus the employer right. Because employers do have rights when they employ you. They have certain management rights, and they have the right to limit your religious expression to a certain degree. So you could do all this instead of having a national crisis like the PQ is creating here. You could simply have had the president of the Treasury Board of Quebec pass he's the guy who is responsible for human resources policies for the Quebec Civil Service. He could have passed just a dress code saying, okay, from now on, if, for example, you're working not with the public, you can wear whatever you want, to the extent that if you wear a religious sign, it does not imply that the state is condoning or approving that particular religion. And that approach is the one that was taken by Bill Clinton back in 1997 when he issued a 12-page set of guidelines to all of the heads of agencies and departments in the U.S., where he said, okay, we have to balance individual rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution versus management rights. And so he went on in that document with a whole bunch of a very subtle document with a lot of nuance and examples dealing with a whole bunch of topics. And it's not a black and white thing. And in that document, they make a clear distinction between the state and the employees. The state can be neutral and should be neutral, but that doesn't mean that if the state is neutral, that all its employees have to be neutral. So, to me, the charter is just a blunt instrument with just one section, and in a fell swoop of the pen, they basically decided to violate the rights and freedoms of everybody in terms of wearing religious signs, and we believe that that's not right.
Essentially, I see the PQ using a wedge politics issue to, as you say, cover things that are already covered under the Quebec or Canadian Charter of Rights. So we're restating things, which is the obvious, in a hope of, getting a few more seats in rural Quebec and a hope of getting a majority.
Yeah, Bill 60 is basically either useless or redundant. Now, there is in the Canadian legal system, if you look at the Canadian Constitution, there's actually or even the Canadian Charter, there's not a specific section that talks about the laicity of the state. But I mean, it's all. Everybody understands that Canada is a secular state, and that Quebec is a secular province, and so okay. Well, we might need to say it, but for the rest, I mean, do we need a third charter where we talk about equality of men and women?
But that's already covered under the Quebec Charter of Rights
and the federal charter. So you got to wonder really why did they do this? And I know that having talked to people in authority, that they basically decided that they wanted to have a debate. They wanted to create a
debate or a crisis.
Yeah, well, they wanted to create a crisis, so they wanted to try to get all these people who are maybe a bit fearsome of immigrants to come on their side, and so to me it's strictly an electoralist approach. And I have to admit that these people are so smart. They are smart because according to the polls anyway, there's a majority of people who support Bill 60, and I think that's a really sad thing to say.
I'm worried on the fact that, on the one hand, the Supreme Court of Canada has permitted, members of the Sikh community to wear their turbans within the RCMP. So if you start, declining possible opinions, judicial opinions from that, Quebec is going probably looking for a notwithstanding clause because they anticipate that it probably will not withstand the challenge of the courts.
They've said that they would not use a notwithstanding clause. I think what they will do is that if as expected, the Supreme Court turns it down and says it's unconstitutional, they'll say, aha, you see, we need to be independent. We need to separate because the Supreme Court, these bad guys in Ottawa, are deciding what our culture and what our values should be. But you're right. I mean, the Supreme Court said in that particular judgment that the fact that an RCMP officer wears a turban, that does not force you to adopt the Sikh religion. If you're arrested by somebody who's Jewish and has a kippah, it doesn't force you to adopt the Jewish religion. And so there's a distinction to be made between the fact that somebody is wearing something, a religious sign, and the fact that it's forcing you.
Or I can go to the Jewish general, or I can go to l'Hôpital Charlemagne. Obviously, there's great doctors in both institutions, and one happens to wear a kippah. I don't think he's going to treat me differently than if I'm not wearing one.
No, and basically what the Supreme Court said is that you do not have a constitutionally guaranteed right not to be shocked or not to be embarrassed or not to feel good if somebody wears something. I mean, that's not a constitutional right you have. I mean, we live in society and we have to accept differences. We have to accept the fact that we have a lot of immigrants here and people who may have different garb, but you don't have a constitutional right for that. And what the PQ is doing, basically, they're saying it's their approach of everybody should be the same. We should all be Quebecers, and there's some kind of image of what a Quebecer is, and if you're wearing a hijab or a kippah,
are you part of the new? Are you part of the new? Québec pour tous?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a whole definition of the new. What's the new? NOUS, and so it's really social engineering and playing on fears, and that's really what. what bugs me the most, what saddens me the most, is that this whole debate has brought up all this kind of, I wouldn't say hatred, but all these things that people say about others, and it just feeds bad feelings about immigrants, and I think that's wrong, and that's. But I'm sure that it's part of their strategy.
Well, there's idiots on both sides of the issue, and we saw that when that poor lady died on the escalator in the subway, and then when it became known that she was wearing a hijab, and then idiots started saying, well, it's a good thing that she died. I think that's kind of sick, and but we've unfortunately have idiots on both sides of the issue.
Absolutely. I mean, you have people who are talking about integrists and extremists, and yeah, there are a few. I remember going to Saint Jérôme in a restaurant, and somebody said, "Oh, Mr. Pouliot, I got to talk to you. We have to have guidelines for all these reasonable accommodations." We're in Saint Jérôme. The guy has probably never seen a veil or a hijab, So, I mean, it has fostered an atmosphere of acrimony and of fear of the other and hatred of the other, and I think that's sad. When you have the leadership of your province, of your country, that's stoking those bad feelings, I just think it's really sad.
Il est 12h41, vous êtes à l'écoute du South Shore Report. Nous sommes en conversation avec Adrien Pouliot, chef du Parti conservateur du Québec. Monsieur Pouliot, I think we've talked enough about the charter. I think we have to talk about what's important. we have to talk about what's important is the economy. I think I'm hearing from all quarters, be it in the mining, in the real estate, and in several fields, everything is stopped, or people are basically delaying investment. Are people going to, with an election coming up, are we going to be able to talk about the economy, and especially after Jacques Parizeau's comments earlier this week on saying that we've been declining for 12 years?
Yeah, I think we will. It's very difficult to try to have a single issue election. Jean Charest tried to have that last time on the student uprising, and it quickly went off in many other directions. Clearly, the Liberal Party, François Legault, myself, there's a lot of people who will want to talk about something else than the charter, and of course the PQ is trying to avoid it because they have a terrible record, and frankly it's not just the PQ. I mean, it's 40 years of socialism, of increasing the size of the state, of increasing taxes and increasing regulation and encroaching on individual rights and freedoms. So frankly, for me, whether it's the PQ or the Liberals, the only difference between the two is on the question of separation. But from an economic standpoint, they're both statist, interventionist governments. Let's not forget that the debt under the Liberals increased by about 40%. Taxes have increased in the last three budgets of M. Bachand. Regulation keeps increasing. So, the result, it was kind of, it was just, I think, ironic to read Jacques Parizeau, who, by the way, has been saying for the last year that there's no problem with the debt, and now suddenly, well, maybe there is a problem with the debt, and maybe there is a problem with our economy, and of course his solution is always more of the same. Well, he said in his letter, there is a problem with the economy, and what we need is a real a real industrial policy. But we've had industrial policies for the last 40 years. We've had gazillions of them, and it doesn't work. So, we keep having chefs in the kitchen who are using the same cookbook. We change the chefs once in a while, a Liberal a few years and a PQ a few years, but they still are they're still using the same cookbook. So what we need to do is change the cookbook and go back to the fundamentals of a market economy and push back on this socialism and increasing size of the state and taxes and programs for everybody, and try to get back to what made Canada and Quebec so great, which was basically entrepreneurial approach and freedoms and small government.
Fez came up with their budget this week, and obviously they went from a $56 billion deficit to technically a balanced budget now. If you've got a 2.9 deficit and a $3 billion reserve, the books are balanced. Obviously, they've done a lot of cuts here and there, and people are upset and complaining, and particularly the civil service. But I don't see anybody in Quebec that's been willing to look at the hard facts of, are we in a structural deficit? Are we in at a point where we say, we'll keep paying, but we need more programs? I have this issue where a program that did not exist 5 years ago and is now essential for us to continue our daily lives, but other programs that were there 5 years ago has not been have a strategic revision to find out do we still need this? Are we still getting dollar for value on various programs? And I don't see anybody in Quebec City that can do that. What about, where do you see?
No, you're absolutely right. There's no program revision, no program evaluation, and so we keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and we never cut. I'll give you just an example. There's been over the last couple of weeks through the Commission Charbonneau a lot of discussion about Libre-sponsored funds. Well, Libre-sponsored funds started in Quebec back in the early 80s. There was a commission on capitalization of small businesses, and they said, well, it's very difficult for small businesses to get access to financing or to go on the stock exchange, and therefore we should, try to do something. So it's been 40 years now, and there's never been a review of the program. Does it make sense? Does it work? Do we still need it? Have things changed since? Maybe it's easier now to go and list yourself on the stock exchange. There's the venture exchange now in Toronto, and there's 5,000 companies that have listed since the early 80s on the venture exchange. So we never do that. We have spent, in terms of tax credits, $5 billion. We have given $5 billion of tax credits to investors in these labor-sponsored funds. I think it's not a bad idea to review whether or not it works, especially since, everything we've heard at the Charbonneau Commission about all the, everything that's going on, and the mafia and the unions being involved in these decisions of these funds. These funds invest less than 25% of their monies into small Quebec businesses, and that was supposed to be their mission. Instead they invest in shares of Google and IBM and Shell and Exxon, and they invest in bonds of the Quebec and Canadian and BC and Ontario governments. They invest in shares of large Quebec companies listed on the stock exchange, like Transat and Metro and Cogeco Cable. I mean, that's not what they were created for.
But they're investing in marinas and
arenas. They
dance clubs.
$40 million in the hockey team we know well, called the Canadians. I mean, they're so big that they they don't know where to invest their money. So your point is well taken. You need to review regularly these programs to see if they're still needed, if they achieve their objectives. So there's a huge amount of just doing that. You would save billions and billions of dollars if you just went through that.
I question myself. Insofar as how are you going to handle the next election? Are you going to have candidates in 128 ridings? How obviously you're starting with your hands tied behind your back, but what kind of visibility do you intend to take within the next election?
An election is won on the ground, and basically it's doing door to door and getting your program, giving your program some visibility. Of course, with the new electoral laws, the financing of political parties, they've managed to basically keep all the newcomers out.
Yeah, you're behind the 8 ball on this one.
It's very difficult to get financing. I mean, even if people want to give you money, they're going to give you only $100 a year. So it's not easy, and the government gives you grants because now political parties are, basically on welfare in the sense that they get welfare payments from the government based on the number of votes they had at the previous election. So how do you start a new party? You don't have any votes, so you don't have any grants. But it's one on the ground, and for me, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We need to build. We need to get people to give them more education on how the market works. Explain how the increasing size of government does not create wealth, but actually destroys capital, destroys wealth. So it's a long process. And my goal initially is to give people like me who want to see a smaller government, to give these people a voice. Start with a voice at the National Assembly so that you can then access the parliamentary press and start influencing the parties in the National Assembly. A little bit like Québec Solidaire is forcing the PQ even further to the left. What I want to do is to have a voice in the National Assembly to at least, pull the Liberals to the right. So it's going to be one on the ground. We're going to try to have 125 candidates. We want to focus in areas that are good for us, which is basically the area of Quebec City, the Beauce area, where the ADQ back in 2007 was very strong, where the federal conservatives are strong. So that's where we want to focus our efforts. And down the road in 10 years, within 10 years, we want to be a force to be reckoned with in the National Assembly, and be able to apply these policies of smaller government, less taxes, less regulation. So it's a long-term project. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And what we need is volunteers and people who are willing to help us on the ground, and that's what we're looking for.
So, questions quickly. La taxe santé, do we keep it or do we trash it?
We want to reduce the tax burden of everybody in Quebec. Now, there's so many taxes that where do you start by cutting? But certainly, we're going to reduce the tax burden. Well, first you have to balance the books. Well, not only balance the books, you have to even have a surplus because you want to pay out that huge debt that keeps growing. But you want to reduce taxes for everybody. That's one way of doing it. Maybe you just reduce the general tax rates. We want to reduce taxes on corporations because actually corporations don't pay tax. They
get grants and subsidies.
Cost to either the employee or the supplier or the consumer. So we want to reduce those taxes and reduce grants that are given to companies because that's corporate welfare, and we don't think that works.
What about daycare?
Daycare, what we're looking at in terms of daycare, and it's a little bit the same thing as in public schools. We'd like to have a kind of a voucher system where, let's say, in schools, for example, let's say it costs, just for argument's sake, $6,000 per year to send somebody to a public school. We'd like to give the $6,000 to the parents, and then let schools compete to get that voucher and get that business, that customer from the parent. And so if you create that competition, you will have an incredible wave of innovation. We would, of course, want to give more power to the schools, less power to the government to decide, how to give the curriculum. So the same thing would be. Do we
touch private schools? Or to keep the system as it is?
No, you still have quotes public schools, but they would have to react more like a private school because now they would be in competition, one against the other, public against public and public against private, to attract the customers. A little bit like today in a university or in Cégep. You pay. The university gets paid by the number of people it has. So there's competition.
They should get paid by the number of people that graduate.
And we would like to do the same thing for for daycare, we would like to give $100 per child per week, and so the parent would, with that $100, would decide: do I keep the $100 and stay at home to raise my child, or do I go out and buy a daycare service with my $100? And we would basically allow, again, people to, reduce regulation, allow people to open more daycare centers, and they would compete to get your dollars. And we know that works. I mean, what doesn't work is monopolies and barriers to entry and corporate.
Adrien, I'm sorry, Adrien Pouliot. Yep. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Okay, it's my pleasure.
The music is starting to tell me I'm on my way out. Thank you very much for spending the time, and I hope we'll see you on the campaign trail soon.
Thank you very much, Patrick.